when you're a consultant, you always try to act like you're older than you are. And I realized that didn't really make me happy. You know, I was running around and trying to act like a 35-year-old, 40-year-old person, so people will take me seriously and pay a lot of money for my consulting per diems. But it didn't make me a happy person. And then something happened that really changed my life, which is that 2 university friends of mine, Robert and David, asked me to join their startup, which was about a year old, so was still pretty small. And that startup was Zalando. And at that time, selling shoes on the internet wasn't really a thing, so it was high risk, but I was really in the mood to maybe do something that's not super reasonable, because I was a really rational, really reasonable person at the time, so I just thought, okay, what the heck, I'll just do it. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. I instantly fell in love with the company. It was so fast moving, it was so vibrant, people were young, people were on a mission, and they really didn't care that they were young. Like, everybody told us all the time, you're inexperienced, you don't know this, you don't know that, but we said, yeah, but we're gonna figure out, and we did. So that's kind of how it started for me, and then sort of I was at the company for 12 years, which I guess we're gonna talk about a little bit, and then at some point I decided now it's time for me to step out. 12 years of operating was a great time for me, but then I also thought now something new should come, and I stepped down in 2021.
Perfect. Can we put up the pictures from early days of Zalando? So from early days.
Maybe it's this one here. No.
You got it? Okay.
Here we go.
And look at the numbers.
Should we? Yeah.
Should
so when I left, you mentioned the company had 10 billion in revenues, which is obviously sounds very big, and it is big. I always thought, it could maybe be even bigger, but it's a large number. But I think it's always important to realize when you look at these companies that they also started really small, right? So and you can tell by the first picture I share with you being the business plan, we were a pretty numbers-driven bunch of people. And the idea was, so the company was supposed to do 3 million in revenues in 2009, which is when I started. And then the plan was to go to 60 million in revenues in 2013. And it actually turned out to be close to 2 billion in 2013. So, and why am I saying it? I think not every ambitious journey maybe they don't always start that ambitious. Like, our plans were actually much more modest. But then we understood pretty quickly that we were onto something, and then we doubled down big time. The other side of the coin is down there. It says we're planning to invest something like 3 million euros over 4 years. I think we invested $500 million, so a lot more of capital and money that was deployed into building this company, because in e-commerce, obviously, you need infrastructure, you need many things. So it turned out to be a very different journey, but in the beginning, it was quite modest.
Amazing. 24-year-old Rubin is here.
Actually, this picture was taken, I guess, a few months before I started. And the reason why the picture was taken and why I like it so much is, in the beginning, the founding team always, had the orders coming in, and they would pack the parcel in the office, and then in the evening they would take it to the post office. And then came the proud day where, for the first time, Zalando had enough orders that DHL would actually agree not to have the parcels delivered to the post office, but to send somebody to pick them up. So somebody came to the office to pick them up, and that's this guy in the yellow, so DHL guy, to pick it up. And this is David, one of the 2 co-founders, Robert, and Nikki, employee number 1. And and when I joined, Robert and David were kind enough to let me in as kind of the third equal partner in the whole thing, and we managed the company actually as 3 co-CEOs for 12 years to come.
Amazing. So maybe can you mention how your journey changed during that growth? Because this is like imagining 60 million, 30 million to 2 billion is a big change. What was your role, and how did you grow?
So I think what changed was that we really step by step understood the economics of our business on a very granular level. We understood that that customers actually love what we do, and that they will then behave in a certain way, that they will do first orders, and then they will come back and they will reorder. We understood what it takes to acquire customers through marketing. Those were the early days of online marketing, and I think in the Germany context, we were maybe the first one to figure out how to think about acquisition cost, lifetime value. And then we actually became quite bullish and decided to do something that is actually not so popular maybe in Germany, unfortunately, because we said, look, we can see the KPIs, we can observe the behavior, we can make some reasonable assumptions about the future. And this actually tells us we should not be investing like a few million, but really hundreds of millions into acquiring customers. And we can prove to you that it makes sense because we have observed the behavior of the early cohorts. And that's extremely unpopular in Germany, I would say, and maybe today it still is, because you're it comes across as kind of betting on the future, right, and doing something that's unreasonable, which really to us always felt quite reasonable because we felt we've really understood what the mechanics of this is, and we're able to and willing to convince other people. We talked about storytelling, to convince other people not only that we are passionate about this, because passion is not enough. When you want to invest big amounts of money, you also need to explain how it actually is going to work and what the proof points are that you know what's going to happen.
So I actually want to ask, how did you work as a team? I remember the early days of Insider. You and I, we had a chat about this. They would invite me in the middle of the night, like 9 p.m. for their brainstorming session. And they would bring the best people who can bring an insight or something, how they can solve that problem. That was the main topic. And they would discuss, they would fight, I mean, in a good way to solve a problem. That was their working style. How did you work as co-founders, early days and later?
Yeah, so our style was also really, I would say, ultimately very consensus driven. I mentioned we were 3 co-founders. We had the rule kind of ultimately we vote, right? So like there's always going to be a decision. But we had the habit to really take the entire team along if possible and really debate long hours on what the best path forward is. Always, as you say, involving those people that know more than us, right? So like I think if you hire and pay a team, you might as well listen to them, right? Otherwise, maybe you don't even need them. So we try to listen to our team. There are examples where we didn't, which didn't end so well, but that's another story. And then it was really about speed and about, we had this habit, for example, of forming ad hoc teams. Sometimes we had many operational crises in the company. When you grow so fast and you have to ship all these parcels, things go wrong all the time. So we just had the habit and the culture that if things go wrong and affect customers, it's all hands on deck. We had this kind of war room principle that if there's an issue, everybody who can contribute to solving it goes physically into a room, and they're not supposed to come out of it until it's solved. They might go to the bathroom and they might also get something to eat, but they cannot work on other things. So really to create this laser focus on the most burning needs of the business.
Perfect. Focus on the execution. So you are really unique because you were 3 co-CEOs. So this is really rare. But on the other side, I mean, the best people that I know, like boiling down to CEO's job is to define where to go as a company, finding the best people to do it, and getting the resources to make it happen, which is fundraising. So if you look back on the team side, right people at the right place, obviously I'm sure you have a lot of stories there, and also fundraising side. What advice would you give to this room, to the founders, and how did you do it?
Those are many questions at once. I think on maybe let's focus on the team. So obviously recruiting the right people for your team is one of the most important tasks for any founder and any early team. And I think we're quite good at it. We're quite good at getting people excited about what we want to do. We were able to get people to join the company that really had high profile backgrounds. And we had maybe a few rules that were important to us when we hired. So the first rule was we always said talent is more important than experience. Especially when we were an early company, we hired some people with experience, which never worked. And at least for us, maybe it was our mistake, but like we couldn't get it to work. We hired people from these big retail companies, and like Germany had a few big mail order companies, and they always told us we know about logistics and assortment and these things, and it just didn't work out. They were all about where's my office and these things, and they couldn't adapt to our type of culture. So we always said talent is more important. We want people that are hungry to figure it out, that are can live in our type of environment. The second rule that we had was, at least in the beginning, we always said structure follows people. So we didn't set up a structure and then hire the right people for it, but we looked for the right people and just got them into the company. Sometimes we hired people and didn't even have a role for them, but we thought, this is the right person, I want them on our team, and we are growing so fast, so we're going to find a role as we go along. So we would take these people in and just ask them to work on something that seemed useful to us at the time, and then we would give them a role once they had proven themselves. That was also a concept that worked really well up to a point. When you get to a certain scale, then you have to maybe shift it around and say, okay, now actually structure becomes so important because the team is so big. Like we ended up being 15,000 people, so then it's kind of difficult to just get people in and not have a role, right? But I would say up until 1,000 or 2,000 people, it was mainly focusing on the right people, and then you find the structure later.
So maybe asking on the how. So you are saying it's not important what they know, but it's how they are thinking. So how did you know how they are thinking? Like you mentioned, you gave them a project. That recruitment tactic that you would be able to share? Early days. Yeah,
early days. I mean, for us it was super difficult. We didn't have money for big recruiting agencies, so we mainly recruited from our network. We recruited the best people from our university year. We recruited some really good people from McKinsey. We recruited some, then when we became more and more known in the fashion industry, we were able to also recruit more creative people with an industry background. And I guess you just have to develop a feeling to, in a job interview, understand really what drives people. That's always what we try to focus on most. And that's mainly done, of course, through really case-driven interviews and asking people very specifically about their prior experience and very specifically about situations they have been in the past and how they have dealt with them. And typically it's very difficult for somebody to fake answers when you ask about something very specific that has happened in their past. And somebody who wasn't able to talk about an example from their past, how they had worked in a team and how it maybe become difficult and how they solved it. Like if people don't have examples for this, then maybe they're not the right fit for us. And then, of course, there's also an element to just get people in, give them a chance, try it out, and then you will be able to tell pretty quickly if it works out, and also if they have fun doing it, right? I mean, they need to enjoy it. They need to be willing to go all in to match the speed.
So at early stage, I see like recruitment and the fundraising probably like two of the biggest struggles. Coming on to the fundraising, you imagined you would need 3 million, but you ended up raising like 600 million euros till IPO. So how was that journey? Even in Germany, that time, that was a big amount of investments. How did you access that investment?
Definitely. And our big problem was that in Germany, you don't find anybody giving that amount of money to such a young company. Like we were, when we had raised 500 million, we were maybe like 4 or 5 years old. And we are talking 2010, right? Like early 10, 11, 12, 13, like those years. So it was a lot of money, and we had to go outside Germany to raise it. There was a Swedish investment company called Kinnevik that was willing and able to invest in us very early. And I think there is definitely the element of storytelling that you heard a lot about in the prior session, which I think definitely makes sense. You have to be able to, not only be passionate about what you do, but also create that passion in others. And also investors, they need to be a little bit passionate, right? They need a little bit to just want to do it, right? But then, of course, they're also rational people, so you need to have like good proof points. Sometimes I meet founders or scale-ups, and they just think passion is enough to get people convinced. But after a certain time, like when you're very early, you don't have data, that's fine. But at a certain time, when a team is not able to tell you what data they have collected on their journey and what learnings they have made and what specifically that tells them, what does it tell them for the next step, then I get pretty curious, right? So I think you need to be able to use sound reasoning as early as possible so people understand, okay, these guys really want to learn and figure it out and they are on this journey. Yeah, and then I think the third element is always trust. Like, we were a young bunch of people. Like at that time, we were like 26, 27. So you give money to, pretty young, pretty unexperienced people ultimately, right? So you need to create that trust that really they understand your motives, they understand what drives you, and they are willing and able to trust you with those amounts of money. And I think that's also something that's often underestimated. What are the means to build trust? How can you best do that? And by the way, you also need your team to trust you, right? So I think building trust is one of the key elements of a great founder.
Amazing. Actually, one of the Sequoia founders, Dan Valentine, has a famous video. He calls early stage founders as immature storytellers. And he says, our job as venture capitalists or board members to help them to become the perfect storytellers. So I think it's all tying up to there. So I have so many questions on Zalando side, but I want to go to the investor side now. After like 12 plus years and 10 plus years operating an entrepreneurial journey, you became an investor. So how did it happen, the transition, and how you are thinking differently now?
Yeah, it's true. I probably the best thing to describe what I'm doing is to say I'm an investor, even though I have to say, like my personal passion is not really the investing itself. Like I didn't wake up and thought I want to be an investor. What I really, my problem was, I was really a passionate company builder. That's what I enjoyed to do. That's what my professional purpose is. But then I decided for myself, I don't want to operate anymore. I don't want to do it 24/7. I want to have like a different way of also maybe balancing the needs of my family and the needs of my job. So I decided to step out of Zalando. And then the question is, what can you do to still be able to do company building without doing the whole operating bit? And so my idea was to become a mentor to other founders, and that's what I had started already at Zalando. And then, of course, the vehicle to do that is to invest in them, right? So I invest money in startups and scale-ups, but more importantly, I'm interested to partner with them, to understand what they do, to try to be helpful to them. And that's where I find purpose, to meet other people that are passionate about company building, and then to think about how can I make them as successful as possible in what they do. And of course, that includes also to really change the way you operate, because I used to be very much into the detail. I used to love the detail. And when you work with other founders, you cannot show up and just kind of, go into the details of the company all the time. It doesn't work that way. You have to trust them. You have to let them do it, and you have to learn kind of, when to speak and when not to speak. And that's a whole new learning curve also for myself. But I enjoy it a lot, and that's why I became an investor.
Perfect. By the way, if we look at the history, the best success stories are coming people from like you. When you mentor, the next generation becomes more successful. So if I was an entrepreneur, I would definitely talk to him. So them to talk to you, you should also share what you are investing in, what you are looking for.
It's very broad. I'm most of all I'm looking for teams that I enjoy working with, and I invest mainly, of course, in Germany and around, because that's where my network is. But I'm also super excited to get to know other places, like Turkey, for example, which I mainly got to know through Insider, who was kind enough to invite me to work with them also a little bit. So, I'm excited to get to know new parts of the world. I'm also excited to invest into many different type of business models. We maybe don't do so much very early, so I don't do a lot of pre-product market fit or pre-revenue, just because I think to me it's more interesting to work with companies where there is already something to work with. And then maybe there are some sectors that we understand more or less about, but also there I'm really like, if there's something new that I find interesting, then for me it's also a way to learn more about company building, how it works in different sectors. And we're relatively agnostic to what the company does. the team needs to be passionate about it, and they also need to be able to make me a little bit passionate about what they do, but it doesn't have to be like consumer or only software or only AI.
Perfect. So since now you are working with more than 30 companies, what really changed in your mind from operator to investor at your thinking? Now, how you are thinking differently about the entrepreneurs? Or I can jump into the Turkish founders. So
no, like what has changed, I think what I had to change about myself is to be willing to take a step back and to really more deeply understand how do other people work. And at Zalando, I have to say, when I had many people kind of reporting to me, and I also respected that they have their way of operating, but I maybe also sometimes had the point where I said, okay, but ultimately I have a very specific view on how I think this company should work, and I'm also gonna enforce that view if I have to. And that's not how it works when you work with founders, right? So there you have to really find a way to let them be, and hopefully they will let you intervene when you see something that maybe should be different, and you find a way to talk to them about it in a way that they can accept. So that's probably what changed most about the way that I work.
Perfect. So, I mean, you have been talking to a lot of Turkish founders, and we have been talking about some of them. As an outsider and insider now, how do you think Turkish founders are unique?
Oh, what?
Unique. What is different about Turkish founders?
The thing that I mean, there is not the Turkish founder, obviously, right? So there's many different type of people, and there's also maybe not the German founder, but what I like most, what I enjoy most is really the kind of the passion, the mindset, and the urge to win. And that maybe sounds a bit cheesy, but really, like when I meet founders in Germany, that's something where I sometimes feel we have maybe lost it a little bit, because when you start something, you need to have this kind of energy that you ultimately want to prove it, you want to win, you want to show that your approach works, and you're also I think in general Turkish founders are very good at improvising, are very hard-nosed, are very good at accepting that things change, and then you have to adapt to it and find a different way to make it work. There was one founder I talked to, he said, look, like in my environment, every day there's like 100 reasons why it could not work, but my role is not to accept any one of them and still make it work. And I think that is like an energy I enjoy very much, and that I think is maybe a little bit unique.
So one of my first investments was Turkish founder born and raised in Germany and came to build a company here. I would always say German and Turkish combo is perfect. Passion and discipline. But going back to what we can do better, because you have been speaking a lot of them, like anything we can do better?
So I think one is, I think you should realize that there's really this, like when you look at the outside at this location, I think there's this great opportunity, and I think Inside is a great example for that, that you really might be capable to expand not only to Middle East, but also maybe Southeast Asia and also Europe. And I think if I think as a German startup, it's pretty far, like geographically, but also culturally, to go to all these places. And I think there actually you might be kind of in the middle between Europe and Asia. I think that's a fascinating location, both geographically and maybe also in terms of your mindset. And I think that's a big opportunity that you should explain well and really think about how you can use that in your company building journey. Maybe a second idea, if I'm allowed to say, and maybe it's also my mistake, but sometimes when I speak to Turkish founders, I get a little bit confused, because sometimes I get the idea like everybody is trying to do everything at the same time. And that's sometimes a little bit, let's say, overwhelming for me. And
we can do everything.
Exactly. And maybe that also comes back to the storytelling piece. I think sometimes maybe, especially when you speak to people that are not from your language, from your country, from your background, it is important to maybe simplify for them a little bit and focus on what are really kind of the steps you want to take. And if you say, today you're only in Turkey and you want to be in 12 markets, that's great, but don't tell me you're going to open all of them tomorrow at the same time. Tell me about, how do you think about internationalization? At least that's what we tried to do at Zalando as one example. We also went to 20-something markets over time, but the starting point was the first market. So how do you select a market that is small enough to not be a big risk, that is similar enough to your geography, to your customer base, that you have a good chance to succeed, and then really sort of go to that market and try to pivot and figure out what does your rollout model work for a different country. And then once you have shown it in 1 or 2 markets, then yes, then maybe you can do, like Zalando, I think our record was to do 7 markets in 1 year. And there were big markets like France and Italy and Switzerland and so forth. So I would say first, test your model, try it out, show some evidence, and then yes, your aspiration should be very big. So that's maybe one element I would mention. Maybe a second one, if I might say, I already mentioned trust. I think especially if you want to engage people from other backgrounds, I think the trust building is maybe the most important piece, by the way, for both sides, right? So and sometimes I feel, because we are in such a fast-paced industry, we want to close the round, we want to grow, we want to do this, everything has to go very fast. Maybe sometimes the fastest way to get to success is not to ask after the first meeting, okay, so are you going to invest? Or for the investor to ask, okay, can I get in? But take time to get to know each other, and build that trust step by step.
Actually, one last question, then I will go to the questions, and they have something about the global growth, but I'll come later. So the last question is, what would you tell yourself if you would go back to your first day as an entrepreneur? Give us your entrepreneurial wisdom.
I don't have wisdom to offer, I'm afraid. But when I think back, sometimes what I wish somebody would have told me is a bit this, of course you want to work hard, of course you want to be on top of every problem, of course you want to control everything, and that all makes sense, but maybe sometimes also you should just relax a little bit and also make sure you can actually enjoy the ride. I think being part of building a company is like being in a live Netflix series, right? You actually experience the meetings where it happens, the successes, the failures, the plot, you're in the middle of all of that. And I think that's something really very few people get to experience. And in hindsight, sometimes I think I should have just, enjoyed the moment a little bit more, like in a roller coaster ride, and be less, okay, I have to be on top of everything, which ultimately, of course, you also need to do. But that's probably what I would tell myself.
Okay, how do we do that? That's the big question, I guess.
Well, actually, one very specific thing somebody told me once, and we tried it a few times, actually worked well for us. When you take a big decision, you always want to take it sober. And if the decision is yes, then you want to get drunk and see if you would still take the same decision. Okay. And I think it's actually quite a good idea. And for those of you that don't drink alcohol, that's also fine. I think the point is there is a rational way to think about a decision, and there's also a slightly irrational way, kind of, ultimately, let's just do it, right? That's what we want to do. And I think the best decisions are always when those two align. And if it's purely rational, maybe ultimately smart, but ultimately not so great. And only drunk, definitely bad idea. So I think those two need to align.
I love that. Okay. So I'm going to open up to the questions. My first question that I saw is about actually your global growth playbook. You mentioned a bit, but how did you really did the global growth? How did you pick the first country? What did you do? And how did you land it?
Do we still have the pictures? Do we still have the pictures? Yeah. Maybe if you can, because there's one that this one actually. So actually going international, this is an actual picture from our office. We had all these different country teams that we co-located in our office. So we recruited people from those countries, put them into the Berlin office, because we wanted to have everybody quite central, so they were able to learn from each other. And it just changed the company really, because it made it so international and so much more fun. And these teams had all sorts of competitions among them, so that was pretty cool. The way we prioritized it, I think in essence I already said it. We thought about what is a market that is close by, that is easy to understand for us, that has a similar taste, maybe also because assortment was so important. So we decided to go to Netherlands. And so we prepared that launch pretty quickly. I would say it was our most imperfect launch, obviously, so we just went ahead. And then we took maybe half a year to optimize, so to figure out what do people expect in terms of logistics, what's different in terms of performance marketing, what gaps do we have in the assortment, like figuring out what needs to be central, what needs to be localized. Like at the beginning, we didn't really know. Like you need the local language maybe, but we, for example, underestimated local payment methods, local delivery services, like how to localize and how to make it a truly local experience to the customer. And then once we saw that works, that's kind of the concept then we took to all of those markets. Our way to prioritize markets was actually pretty simple. So I think if I would talk to people today, I would tell them it's too simple, but we just looked at the matrix of how many people live in the country and what's the online penetration. And that's kind of, if you were far up in the right corner, then we would prioritize those markets. It was pretty straightforward.
So I remember early days of Insider or our portfolio companies, they would do like which country to pick, and they would be doing OPTPT for the Turks in the room. But then obviously it gets sophisticated by trying that. So I want to thank you, Rubin. It's a big pleasure. Hopefully we will do many more deals or investments, and we will work with a lot of entrepreneurs in Turkey with you. That was a big applause for him.
Thank you.
Great
pleasure. Thank you so much.